Hey, it's Dr. Thornell, and I want to share a story with you that, as I remember back, at that moment in time, gave me goosebumps. And occasionally, when I think of that story or I tell that story, it was such a powerful experience for me that it can still bring back that same feeling. And it had to do with a 94-year-old patient, which just doesn't really matter to the story that she was 94, but she's a 94-year-old woman that was absolutely brilliant. I'm going back now to 2002 when this story happened. And at that time, she was 94 years old. She had built an amazing business. She was the figurehead of this business, which at that time there weren't a lot of really powerful women in business, but she had built this business, and at 94 she had 80 something employees and knew everybody by name. She still signed all the paychecks personally. Just an amazingly brilliant woman. And I had just come back from a pediatric chiropractic seminar, and she said to me, I see all these kids in your office, and now you're talking about going to pediatric seminars. She said, why are kids going to the chiropractor? What was your seminar about? And so I explained to her that kids suffer physically a lot of the same types of things that adults do, and that if you can address those things when they're young, those minor problems don't develop into much bigger problems, and you show up in our office at 30 years old and you've already got 20 years worth of arthritis developing. And then I said, but a large part of what I was studying, what was at this seminar, was on brain development and how chiropractic care affects the brain. And she said, well, what does adjusting the spine have to do with the brain? And so I explained to her that the nervous system, starting with the brain, is a feedback system. Information comes from the brain to the body and the body back to the brain. And frequently within chiropractic, I and probably many other chiropractors get caught up on the brain sending information to the body, and we sort of forget about the body back to the brain part of it. And this seminar reminded me of that, and I was telling her, that basically everything you ever learn in life has to be taken in from your senses. You're either seeing something, you're hearing something, you're smelling something, you're touching something, you're tasting something, and we're bringing that information from our environment through our nervous system to the brain to be able to learn anything. So I use the example of a child sitting in class. If they're not hearing things properly because the brain, or excuse me, the nervous system is distorting that information before it gets to the brain, when they go to spit that information back out, it doesn't work. Dyslexia would be sort of an example of that. What they're seeing, somebody with dyslexia on the page, that information is the same for everybody, but somehow by the time it gets to their brain, it's distorted. So when they try to spit it back out, it comes out distorted. So the communication from the outside world to your brain is dependent on the nervous system. And she sat there for a second and she said, oh, I get it. All these little kids need to get adjusted so they don't grow up to be rapists and murderers. And I was like, well, how did you get that out of what I just said? And I thought about it for a second, and she's absolutely right. Imagine if everything a child is learning about how to be a responsible, normal adult in society, as we're growing and developing, if that information about how to be in a healthy relationship, if that information is distorted before it gets to the brain, when we go to then act on this, what we think is a healthy relationship, and that information's all distorted, maybe we're not having a healthy relationship anymore, and maybe we're acting in violent ways because that information was distorted. And maybe the ultimate end of all that could be, people grow up to be rapists and murderers because they didn't learn how to be normal members of society because that information was distorted coming in. So just another reminder about how important the healthy spine is, because the healthy spine keeps the nervous system free of interference so that what we're taking from our outside world and learning is accurate and clear, so that when we try to bring that back out, whether that's sitting in a classroom and putting information onto a test page, or it's a job interview, or it's a relationship. We're getting accurate information back out so that we respond in an accurate way. So just an amazing example of how a 94-year-old woman with no chiropractic experience actually taught me something more about my own profession. I had been in chiropractic for 5 years already, was doing all sorts of wonderful things at that time with pediatrics, and that thought had never crossed my mind. So it absolutely was a hair-raising experience for me.